While working on another video, I had an epiphany about an issue that permeates the game beneath the surface. Something I don't think people put too much thought into, and I'd like to put that to task. The structure behind legacy support is severely flawed. When I refer to legacy support, I'm talking about cards that are released well after the archetype's initial inception. Not Konami's new design kick of releasing an archetype in an unplayable state, then, surprise surprise, the missing parts just so happen to be in another product. There's a connecting thread between the issues, but there's another pertinent issue with the former. When you think of legacy support for archetypes, what cards come to mind? Maybe something like a Dragoon or DPE, powerful boss monsters that may or may not leave the target archetype. Maybe it's the billionth hero fusion that does nothing meaningful for the deck's game plan. Maybe it's something like Shari Red that comes out of nowhere and solves some issues with the deck. Maybe it's something like Linkage which reinvigorates the deck's playstyle. Or maybe it's something like Circular. Legacy support has a tendency to be 1 to 2 cards, maybe more if you're lucky, and while some decks can make that mold work, it is not a one-size-fits-all approach. And yet, Konami would have you believe it is, releasing 1 to 2 cards of support that ultimately do nothing for most decks. Seeing as a lot of them had fundamental flaws from the outset, the model seems less concerned with adapting them to a modern setting with an understanding of the cards, and more concerned with simply jingling keys for the fans of the archetype. When it comes to this MO behind legacy support, there are only 2 realities we can be presented from them. This model for support is actively hampering not only the decks that receive them, but even potentially the game itself on a fundamental level. Let us start with the game warping reality they can present. Often you'll hear people call cards a circular. I've gotten annoyed with this because at this point printing more than one effect on a card means it's a circular. I think it's even getting to the point where people aren't saying this card is a custom, they're just saying this card is a circular. It's losing meaning, and I think it's the most important part of analyzing what is wrong with a lot of modern card design in general. MathMech Circular is a card that does absolutely everything it needs to in order to have made MathMech as an archetype function efficiently. It sends Sigma for cost and summons itself. It's essentially a free rank 4, and when you summon Sigma, you get to add Superfactorial from deck. Or, if you drew Superfactorial, you can add the Reborn spell for extension. The 2 together then make Alimbertion. Since you've used Sigma for an Xyz summon, it doesn't get banished by its own effect. This is important, as you will need to retain it engraved for the trap. Alimbertion searches out Diameter, which then allows you to summon it to revive one of the 2 you detached from Alimbertion. After that, it's Cyburst combo slop and the chef's flavor of choice. Once whatever Cyburst pile board has been cobbled together, Superfactorial is now live to make Laplacian on the opponent's turn. Now, there's a lot to process here. The important takeaway though is that Circular by itself made 4 cards in the archetype not only live, but rapid fire use. Everything that makes the deck as strong and consistent as it is funneled into Circular. Without it, everything falls apart. It is quite literally load-bearing card design. This heavy reliance on the card is part of why you ran Small World. Not only was it fortunate enough to be easy to bridge into, by its own design, the card advantage loss that typically makes Small World an unappealing card meant nothing when you were searching a card that would plus you into infinity. There are also other elements to Circular's design that help it be even more powerful. The fact it sends for cost means even if it were negated, Sigma still gets dumped, which leads into the other unfortunate part of Circular's design. It's a Cyburst. I'll say it now. I hate Cyburst as it exists currently, and it's entirely because of Konami. I want to like Cyburst. I like the aesthetics and theming. I love MathMech's intended gameplay and their visuals. But their monster type is a curse. It's another topic for another video, but all that really needs to be said here is generic Cyburst links are horribly balanced and overproduced. There are so many generic extenders in link climbing that it limits what Cyburst archetypes can do and be. I'd like to remind you, MathMech is an archetype that was designed with synchros and Xyz in mind. playing off their levels being 4 to total into something bigger with synchros, or overlay into something of a higher power. You are making the XYZs, but that's because one contributes to the comboing, and the other is a hand rip you make for free, functionally. You don't make the synchros because, sadly, the 8 is bad, and because they made a generic Link 4 that is Final Sigma but better. And guess what? They're Cybers. Circular locks you into attacking with only one monster the turn you use its effect. This means literally nothing going first, and going second, it still means literally nothing, because you can just make an idiot that's the only attacker you need. And considering these idiots are Cybers, if Circular Cybers locked you instead, it would mean absolutely nothing either. The only meaningful lock they could have printed on the card is Mathmech. And if they did that, Mathmech as an archetype would be limited in what it can do permanently. Especially considering they printed a new Mathmech Synchro 8 that isn't a Mathmech, despite its design clearly signaling it as one. Hopefully by now you know what it actually means for a card to be classified as a circular. Support that is hyper-concentrated into a single card. In the case of Circular, this overtuned power is only really felt because the cards are Cybers. Not only is this unhealthy design when it does break the game, the way Circular did, it's bad design for any archetype that receives support like it. When a weaker deck receives a single piece of support that does everything, the consistency behind the card resolving is everything. It doesn't matter if it fixes everything, if it's extremely susceptible to interruption or just isn't easy to see consistently. This design is what I would refer to as the circular fallacy. By condensing all of an archetype's power into a single card, you are essentially forcing it to resolve the card in order to even function. Not only that, but it ensures the deck is going to follow an extremely linear gameplay pattern, which in turn tends to deprive the deck of its unique identity. Just like Mathmech, but for a less loaded reason. It's not satisfactory support because it doesn't reinvent the wheel or even grease it. It just spins it at hyperspeed instead. And if it does it too well, it'll just get banned like Circular. It makes you wonder what the point in printing it even is. Super Heavy Samurai got their own Circular in Wakaushi, except he does absolutely nothing for Super Heavy Samurai. I don't know what the hell they were thinking when designing this support. The effect that has an archetypal lock is the one that doesn't matter. Great stuff. It grabs the other scale, making it incredibly easy to just use it as a pendulum engine in any deck. Just what I love seeing pendulum used for. Combo slop. And while you could say, it was just an oversight in design, considering the fact they decided to print another super heavy card for the sake of searching this card, when the archetype already had another non-once per turn card that could search it, this was intentional. It's clear they didn't care about making Super Heavy Samurai itself playable. They printed a god-awful Pendulum Synchro and a mid-boss monster and called it a day. They didn't actually attempt to make something of the existing archetype. No spells or traps that could banish themselves to keep the deck's gimmick online. No further equips that embrace more utility or even act as hand traps. No actual use of pendulums to skirt the spell trap restrictions. You know, the entire reason Pendulum was initially incorporated into the strategy. No actual consideration in supporting the archetype. These cards have ruined the Super Heavy Samurai name. Whenever you say Super Heavy Samurai, people are most likely going to think of Wakaushi and not Susanoo. Only real Super Heavy Samurai haters know about the Blue Brawler dilemma. Gen X got their circular in the form of a Link one, notably the most balanced card design in the entire game. But because the deck isn't good, no one bats an eye. The design principle only makes the decks look pathetic when the most broken card doesn't fix them. It's almost as if, when designing support, actual care and consideration should be put into adapting them to the modern game, instead of applying a lazy band-aid fix. But this is where we get to the other reality for legacy support. The independent cards that do nothing at all instead. Every now and then archetypes will get individual cards to add to their roster. In the best cases, this usually unlocks a variety of new combos and plays. On average, it just means there's a new card you can play in the deck. Sometimes not even that. When they follow this cycle of releasing support, the cards have to be more impactful. It enables the circular fallacy. If they don't fall to that fallacy, we end up with cards like Abomination. This card by no means is bad, but it doesn't really do anything to reinvent the deck or make it any more playable. If you release this card alongside the original wave of cards, the deck wouldn't have been any more playable even then. In the same set as Abomination, they released Catch of the Day for Suship. The card is awful. It's a search spell that forsakes utility for the sake of being cute. They released Shari Red and a maze attraction Thrill Train in Pote, the set with Tearlaments, Sprite, and Circular. Thrill Train, just like Abomination, did not suddenly revitalize the deck's playstyle. Shari Red made Suship far better, as the deck needed another card with Shari's name. However, it was a more reserved Circular. Shari Red let you make a rank 4 for free if you revealed another Shari in hand, but the rank 4 it made had to be a Suship, and all the existing Suship XEs suck. The fact you had to have a Shari for it to be online didn't help either, and when you consider the search spell they would print later can't search it, they really pulled their punches. I'm not saying I wanted Shari Red to be another Circular. What I'm saying is, there clearly needs to be more support to balance the deck's weight out. The archetype needs a normal search spell. It needs actual better payoffs than the existing 3 XZs, but none of that was addressed. Nobody wants this support because it only serves as torture. Ooh, look, the deck is close to playable now. Just one more card dumped in as pack filler in a set 5 years from now will change everything. It'll all come together. Just trust me. They can always release more support later, right? Archetypes like heroes have an advantage over things like Amazement or Suship because they will always get more support. Neos Wingman was another card that released in Pote, and it wasn't very notable initially. Until the new Flame Wingman retrain came out later to make it far more appealing to play. Not only this, but anime archetypes actually get full-on waves of support. It feels as though Konami have a conflict of interests. Wanting to support archetypes, but also not wanting to commit too many resources to supporting unpopular ones. Because they aren't popular enough to sell a product, or can even pollute the card pool of the product if the majority of people don't care for them. Why would I want to buy a set with a bunch of cards I don't care about when I can buy a set with a bunch of cards I don't care about? You know, perhaps the cards themselves aren't the problem with moving product, Konami. You look me dead in the eye and tell me you think Amazement is going to get a single new card before the billionth alt-art of Blue Eyes gets printed. Anything directly tied to the anime is always going to be prioritized for nostalgia milking. But there's no nostalgia to milk on non-anime archetypes that Konami never even made notable to begin with. So there's not much incentive for them to even bother to provide them with support. It doesn't matter if the latest hero support isn't noteworthy at release. You and I both know damn well it has a higher chance to be playable on the future than Warrock does. Archetypes only really seem to get support if they have some deemed level of prevalence in the game's identity. The anime is the most consistent one, but the second most being archetypes pertaining to lore storylines. All the dual terminal ones, World Legacy, Sky Striker. Anything else, it's a crapshoot. Will Vanquish Soul ever get support? Who knows? Probably not, but maybe they will. I don't know. None of us know. But if they do, you can bet they'll do nothing or everything all at once. And even if they were to receive a full wave of support, there's still a chance it does little to nothing for the deck's playability. Konami has this weird issue where they seem to live in an alternate timeline, one in which a specific game format that doesn't exist in this one is being run. And for some reason they keep printing cards for it in this timeline. Legacy support for archetypes that don't see play in Modern don't see play in Legacy formats because that support didn't exist then. Hence, none of it can be played. These cards serve no purpose for anyone. There's no wacky Legacy adjacent format that allows existing archetypes to use any and all the current archetypal support. There's no general lower power level format that enables these. So, if they're not pushing the boundaries of the game, what are they pushing? As discussed earlier, it's not like I want them to print circulars for archetypes like Battle and Boxer and Six Sams. Wakaushi and Circular are proof that it may not even salvage the archetype itself. While the support for these two wasn't bad, it didn't really do anything to make them modern playable. What is the point of releasing support that doesn't make an actual impact? Then we just have to wait even longer for them to adapt it further, assuming they do get more support. And by the time they do, it's possible even those cards become outdated and obsolete in design then. I can see wanting to actually test the cards in waves, but you still have to give them a more concrete game plan for modern standards, and certainly do it sooner rather than later. One of the more obvious solutions is introducing more supported formats that can foster these sorts of decks. I'll say it here, and I'll say it a million times. Konami is creatively bankrupt when it comes to running this game. They've chosen to name the official legacy formats Time Wizard, but because Konami lacks creativity in running things, they're not really leaning into that identity. Time Wizard's dumb anime gimmick was that it could advance time and age things, with Baby Dragon to Thousand Dragon and Dark Magician to Dark Sage. You could implement this theme into game structure, splitting Time Wizard into two separate formats, one being the original legacy format as it was historically, then a second one that brings the format forward in time, making newer support for the archetypes that existed in that era legal for play. Of course, Pot of Greed, Red Eyes Fusion, and Dragoon in a format sounds like a pipe bomb waiting to explode, and that's because it is. But if this hypothetical format is run with a modicum of care, it can adapt just like the core game, not just in having ban lists tailored to it specifically, but by acknowledging archetypes that struggle in this format as well, noticing a massive power imbalance based on the imbalance of support for older archetypes, incentivizing Konami to actually print more support for the under-supported old archetypes, functionally leaving no man behind. I mean, people joke about cards being designed for Duel Links when they don't impress. Actually embracing that sort of mentality in a more productive sense could be good for the overall structure of the game. Arguably, there's even more reason to make cards insanely strong because of the likely steeper gaps in this format. This makes everybody happy. Legacy support matters because it actually means something even if it doesn't crack the modern game, meaning people actually still want to buy the product because the cards still have value. The problem is, Konami is never going to do this. As long as the ship ain't sinking, Konami doesn't really care where they steer it. You may not have seen this take coming. Konami should stop printing micro support. It's clear that the very principle is fundamentally bad for the game and the archetypes themselves. If you're going to print support, make sure that it's paced throughout multiple cards, and that whatever philosophy they introduced to the archetype couldn't have possibly been condensed into one card. Some decks only do need a couple cards, but Konami has got to be more aware that if they're going to support an archetype, they should actually commit to supporting the archetype. Giving 1 to 2 decent cards to an archetype that wasn't particularly good in the first place isn't helping anyone. It's not helping the archetype, it's not helping the people that like the archetype, and it's not helping the game. If anything, it's making fans sad that the cards are still bad with the support, and it's certainly not helping Konami make money. How many Amazement players bought Pote for Thrill Train, or Syak for Abomination? If you really just wanted them, you'd buy the singles because they're individual cards. Making legacy support random pack filler does nothing productive. I think it'd be better for the game overall that if Konami decides to make support for an archetype, they actually commit to it and give them a wave instead of a crumb. It actually gives the deck hype and means more people will be willing to buy the damn product and not just 1 or 2 singles. Designing support with more cards in mind also means it's less likely they end up a broken engine that people inevitably grow to hate from overexposure. And for Christ's sake, print a Vanquish Soul search spell on an Earth monster that actually does something on summon. Fire King got an entire structure deck, and while Snake Eyes did most of the heavy lifting in the playability department, that's not to entirely discredit the Fire King support. After all, it made them worth playing alongside them. We've more recently got the Crystron stuff that has brought them back into meta play somewhat. If Konami actually starts to put more care into their archetypes, then legacy support may start to trend for the better, so long as they commit to full-on waves. But for now, until it's the norm and not the outlier, I won't hold my breath. Especially if waves still end up being as unimpressive as the 6 SAM support. Legacy support itself needs support, be it further consistency in the release of them, or an actual format that gives them value that the main game just can't. At the end of the day, Konami has to make cards worth playing. They only need to figure out more ways to find that worth than just printing another circular.